How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Tes, Daf 49 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 49, we wrap up talking about the lungs. There's going to be some more of these scenarios of like something ends up in the lung or in the gallbladder and how did it get there, or in the liver. Anyways, so we're going to have situations like that, and that is how we're going to wrap up our discussion of lungs. We're also going to see the opinion of Reb Shimon from the Mishnah, who had said that a puncture in the lung is only treif if it punctures into one of the main bronchi. We're going to have a look at that slightly as well, and then we will move on to the keivah. We will discuss the keivah. There are, of course, a kosher animal has 4 stomachs. The keivah is the 4th of those stomachs. We're going to be talking about chalev that is on the keivah and the differences between shuman and chalev. It should be relatively interesting, I think. Friends, come join me. Let's enjoy ourselves and learn Daf Mem Tes, Daf 49 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Mem Ches Omid Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Hi machta de ishtikach b'chaticho de chavda. There was a needle that was found sticking out of the liver. Sover Mar Brei de Rav Yosef Limitrafa. Mar Brei de Rav Yosef was thinking, I'm going to say that this is treif. Amar Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi says to Mar Brei de Rav Yosef, Ilu ishtikach bebisra ki agavna havatarif mar. And what if the needle was found sticking out of some of the meat of the animal? Would you have also say there that it is treif as well? Meaning the liver, right? The Mishnah said if the liver is missing, so it's treif, but a puncture is okay. We talk about punctured lungs, punctured esophagus, intestines. Nobody said anything about a punctured liver. So Rav Ashi says, I don't understand what the concern is. If there was just like if there was a needle sticking out of meat, of the meat of the animal, you would say, so what? It's not that doesn't make it a treifa. It shouldn't make the liver a treifa either. Elam Rav Ashi, rather says Rav Ashi, listen to this. Chazinan, we have a look, we get into the details. We say, well, which part of the needle was in the liver and which part of the needle was sticking out of the liver? Kupa is I think it's called the eye of the needle. It's like where you thread. I'm going to call it the eye of the needle. I don't know if it's actually called that, but it's where you thread the needle, where the thread goes in. That part. I'm going to call it the eye of the needle, okay? That's what I'm calling it. I hope it's right. Kupa levar, if the eye of the needle is outside of the liver and the point of the needle is pointed into the liver, nakuve nakiv ve'asoy. Well, then it poked its way into the liver, and it's treif. We'll explain that in a second. Ikupa legav, but if the eye of the needle is in the liver and the point is sticking out of the liver, simpona nakat vasoi, it made its way into the liver through the trachea, essentially. It's a kind of it is a scenario as well as like essentially all of these scenarios about swallowing these items and finding them in the internal organs. They're a little bit difficult for me to relate to, but nonetheless, basically, we say, okay, you have this needle that's sticking out of the liver. So we say, well, okay, we'll make our determination of whether this animal is treif or not based on which part of the needle is in the liver and which part is sticking out of the liver. Why? What's the point? The point is that if the pointy part of the needle is sticking into the liver, and the eye of the needle is sticking out of the liver, we assume that what happened was the needle was swallowed, when it came into the body through the esophagus. It swallowed the needle down the esophagus, and then at some point it poked its way out of the digestive tract, whether through the esophagus or through any of the intestines, and then poked its way into the liver, which is why you're seeing it poked into the liver with the eye of the needle sticking out. And if that's the case, a hole in any of the digestive digestive tract would be a treifa, and therefore, if the pointy part of the needle is sticking into the liver, we assume that it poked its way out of the digestive tract and it is a treifa. Now, however, if the eye of the needle is in the liver and the point of the needle is sticking out of the liver, we say, well, the eye of the needle wouldn't have been able to poke its way out of the digestive tract and poke its way into the liver. Rather, what happened was it inhaled this needle and it kind of made its way, point first. I guess it inhaled it, like breathed it in, and it sounds horrible. I can't imagine coughing that out. Anyways, it sounds horrible. But you basically, the animal inhaled a needle point first, and it went through the trachea, and somehow, it's very convoluted. Somehow it ended up winding its way through the different tubes of the animal until it made its way through the vein of the liver into the liver point first, and then it started point sticking out of the liver. But that is to say, at no point did it poke its way out of any organ that would make it a treifa. Wow, very technical. Anyways, so therefore, depending on what is sticking out, if the eye of the needle is sticking out of the liver, it is treif. If the eye of the needle is in the liver, we assume that it's kosher. Sheesh. V'hani mili ba'alimto, but this is only regarding a needle that is big, in that the eye of the needle wouldn't be able to poke its way through any of the intestines. Aval katinta lo, but if it's a small needle, then even the eye of the needle is still pointy enough that it could have poked its way out of the digestive tract, and therefore, even if the pointy part is in the liver, no, even if the eye of the needle is in the liver, it would still be treif. Wow. Avakatinta lo. Okay, avakatinta, if it's small, loshna kupa legav, it doesn't matter whether the eye of the needle is in the liver, loshna kupa levar, or whether the eye of the needle is outside of the liver. Either way, nakuve nakiv ve'asoi, we're going to assume that it poked its way into the liver and it is treif. Now, frekt de gemoret. We had just said that when it comes to the big needle, so we say that if we say that the eye of the needle could not have poked its way out of the digestive tract, and therefore, if the eye of the needle is inside the liver, so then it must have come through the trachea and stuff. I.e., we make a distinction between whether the eye of the needle is in the liver or outside of the liver, because there are limitations of what you could do with the eye of the needle, because it can't poke its way out of the tract. However, what about a needle that is found in the walls of the Beis HaKosis? The Beis HaKosis is the second of the stomach. Okay, so when food is eaten, so it goes down the esophagus into the keres, which is this big stomach, and from the keres, the next of the four stomachs is called the Beis HaKosis. Now, if they find in a shechted animal that there was a needle in the Beis HaKosis lodged into the wall of the Beis HaKosis, mitzad echod kshero mishnei tzadin treifa v'lo amrinon lechze ikupa levar ikupa legov. Now, I'm just going to chap a shluck of tea. So basically what happens is, if you find a needle in the Beis HaKosis and it is lodged into one of the walls, so basically the walls of the Beis HaKosis are double thick. It's basically an inner wall with a little bit of fat, and then an outer wall. Kind of like we've been discussing these like inner membranes and outer membranes. So The Beis HaKosis has two walls to it, an inner wall and an outer wall. If you find that a needle is inside the Beis HaKosis but lodged into the inner wall of the Beis HaKosis, it hasn't punctured the outer wall, or so it seems. We don't notice a puncture on the outer wall, but we see that it has, however, punctured the inner wall. We say that it is kosher. So long as it hasn't poked all the way through both walls, we say even though it's poked its way through the inner wall, it is still kosher. Now, we don't make a distinction though. I would have thought, based on what we just said about the liver, where we said, well, it depends, if the pointy part of the needle is in the liver, well, then we're going to assume that it poked its way into the liver. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we say the same thing by the Beis HaKosis? If we find that there's a needle in the Beis HaKosis, and it's lodged into the inner wall of the Beis HaKosis, why don't we say, wait a second, before we say that it's kosher, why don't we say, well, which part of the needle is lodged into the inner wall? Is it the eye of the needle? If it's the eye of the needle, how could the eye of the needle have punctured the inner wall? Should we not assume that the needle came through the esophagus and through the digestive tract and poked its way out of the digestive tract and then poked its way into the Beis HaKosis and made its way past the outer wall and then got stuck in the inner wall, and then the outer of the wall, I guess, healed, and that's what we're seeing. Basically, the point is, based on it's very technical, but based on what the distinction that we have just been talking about, that the eye of the needle can't be poking in and out of stuff, it would only be the pointy part. So then, if the eye of the needle is lodged, if the eye of the needle is lodged in the inner wall, how could it have broken through the inner wall? I thought we just said it's impossible. It can't poke through stuff. Shouldn't we have to assume that, well, then why is the eye of the needle in the inner wall? Because it actually poked its way in through outside and stopped after it got through the outer wall, and then the outer wall healed? The question is, why are we not kind of like looking into such a distinction? So again, why is the case of the liver, where we make this whole distinction between which part of the needle is sticking out and which part of the needle is in the liver, and why is that different from the ovi beis hakosis, where we don't even talk about it? Right? A needle is found in lodged into one of the walls, having punctured one of the walls, but not the second one. Mitzad echad, right? It's punctured one of the walls. Kshera. Mishneit stadin treifa, but if it pokes through both walls, so then it's treif. Now, velo amrinon, and we don't say, wait, like we said by the liver. Lechze, let's see, ikupa livar, ikupa legav. Let's see. Which is the part that's lodged into the wall? Is it the eye? Is it not the eye? Is it the pointy part? I'll tell you why. Amir Asam came the ika ochlim umashkim. Look, in the Beis HaKosis, since there's food and drink, and it's not an empty kind of stomach over there. There's a lot in there. There's a lot filling it up. So it forces it. We'll say that the food and the drink, and by the way, this is food and drink that's already gone through one level of processing in the keivah, in the first stomach, and now it's denser food and drink that's in the Beis HaKosis, and it applied pressure and lodged it into the wall, such that even the eye of the needle could have gotten into punctured the first of the walls, and we're not going to assume that it poked its way in there. Okay, Givalded. Another shluck of tea, and we are going to keep moving. Now, says the Gemara, how machta de ishtikach bisimpona rabba. Okay, there was a needle that was found in the simpona rabba de chavda, in the big vein of the liver. So how did it get in there? Hunamar Bredu of Idi Tarif. Hunamar Bredu of Idi said it is treif. We have to assume that it poked its way in there through the digestive tract. Rav Adabar Manyomi Mechasher. Rav Adabar Manyomi says, kosher asu shalua le Ravina. They asked Ravina Amalu, and he says to them, Shkilu glima ditrofai. Whoever said that this animal was treif, you gotta take their cloak from them. I.e., they gotta, because what does Rashi say? She'echilu leklavim, that they fed this animal to the dogs. So Rabbi says, well, they should not have done that. It was really kosher, and you cause them to forfeit their animal. An animal can feed a lot of people. You need to pay them back. If there was a date pit that was found in the gallbladder, Rav Ashi says, Rav Kahana, when we were by the basement of Rav Kahana Omer, he said, Havadai simpona nakat, it must have gotten into the gallbladder via the trachea and a whole path through the tubes of the body and ended up in the gallbladder that way, but not by puncturing through stuff, because date pits are not very punctury. They're not very sharp. So it somehow weaved its way into the gallbladder. And even though a date pit can't get out via the tiny hole between the gallbladder and the liver, nonetheless, mirbal hu diravil lay, the way that it got in is that as the animal was walking and moving and shaking, little by little, this date pit got closer and closer and made it a little by little more into the gallbladder, and we say that that's how it ended up there. Now, this is specifically a date pit. However, an olive pit, olive pits could be sharp. Baza. Well, then we do have to be concerned that maybe it poked its way into the gallbladder and it's a treifa. Rabbi Yochanan says, why is a lung called a reya? Because it enlightens the eyes. Reya is like meir, like ha'ara. It lightens the eyes, the lungs. What does how do we get? What does it mean that the lungs lighten the eyes? How so? When you eat lungs, is that what we should do? Should we just eat lungs? Or maybe no. It's if you have an ingredient in some kind of if you have some kind of a tincture for brightening up the eyes, lung would be a great ingredient for that tincture. So Kilu, is it saying that if you just eat lots of lung, then it'll be great for your eyes? Or is it saying that there is some kind of a tincture that's good for your eyes and lung is a good ingredient in that tincture, but Kilu, it's not lung on its own, it's lung as an ingredient in a eyes tincture. Tashma Kamanir, the Amr of Huna bar Yehuda, Avaza bezuza v'reya dida barba. Well, says Rav Huna bar Yehuda that the price of or you could say when the price of a goose is 1 zuz, the price of its lungs is 4 times that amount, 4 zuz. Basically, the price of the lung of a goose is 4 times the amount of the goose itself. Now, if you're going to tell me that simply the lung, you just eat it and it's good for your eyesight, so linkot bezuza v'lecho el aide saman. No. If to get the benefits of the lung, you just needed to, cook it and eat it, well then why would it be 4 times the price, right? If a whole goose is 1 zuz, why would it just its lung be fetch 4 times the price? Just buy a goose, rip out its heart, and eat it. Rather, it must be it's not just eating heart and eating lungs. Did I just say heart? I meant lungs. Right, so it's not about just eating lungs. It's making a kind of, you have to know what you're doing, right? So you take the lung and you make it into a thing, and then that's why it costs 4 times the price. So it isn't simply just the lung. It is the lung as an ingredient in some kind of a tincture can be good for brightening up your eyes. Inakva reya heicha de mimashmisha yade de tabacha. What if you find that there is a hole in the lung? Okay, that sounds pretty bad. That's a treifa. However, it is in a location that the hands of the shaychit would have been messing with it. Right? We've been talking all about doing different kinds of bedikas and pulling out the lungs, and it's possible that his fingernail, or maybe if he was holding the knife, could have punctured the lung. So we find that there's a hole in the lung. Do we say, oh, dag nabbit, there's a hole in the lung, it's a treifa, or do we say, wait, but this was also an area that the shoichet would have, his hands would have been here, and maybe his fingernails punctured it. Maybe he was holding a knife and that punctured it. Talinon, olo talinon, what do? Do we say it's kosher, it was from the butcher, or not? Rav Acha, it says Adu, we can change it to Acha, if you want. Rav Acha bar Noson Omar Talinon, Rav Acha bar Noson says, yeah, we assume that the butcher did it, and it is kosher. Mazuch B'Rei Rav Mari Omar Lo Talinon, Mazuch B'Rei Rav Mari says, no, we can't assume that it's the shoichet, and it is a treifa. There is a hole in the lung, it's treif. Vilchas Talinon, the halacha is that we assume that it came from the shoichet, and it is kosher. Rav Shmuel Brei de Rab Abo, says Rav Shmuel, the son of Rab Abo, Abba Mereshe Kale de Rafram Ava. My father was one of the people by Rafram that he, when they would give the shir over there, so there would be people who, they didn't have microphones or anything. So the gadol there would say something, and then there would be people who would say it over to the crowd. So it says, Rav Shmuel Brei de Rab Abo, my father was one of those great people. And he said, Rab Abo said, Talinon, that we assume that it's from the shoichet and that the animal is kosher. Amru Kame, you could switch around those next two words. Amru Laha Kame de Mazutra Brei de Rab Mari, and they said this before. Mazutra Brei de Rab Mari, he's the one who said that it's treif, and we just now said that it's kosher. Velo Kibla, he did not accept it, however. Amr Mishasha Kavasi Davu de Abba. Mistarva says, Rav Mishasha, it makes sense, like my grandfather, his grandfather was Rav Acha bar Noson, who had said Talinon, that we assume it's the shoichet, to Talinon bezev, because after all, we learned on, Daf Tes? We learned on Daf Tes, much earlier in the Masechta, that if you shecht an animal, and then a wolf comes and takes the intestines. A wolf comes and grabs, there's a word I'm trying to think of, and spirits away. The wolf spirits away the intestines, and then you spirit away the wolf and take back the intestines, and you see there is a big hole where the wolf was, bit the intestines. There was a big hole there. So there so the question is, clearly the wolf made that hole there, but maybe there was already a hole there from before. Maybe it's treif. We say no. We assume that the hole is only from the wolf. There was no other hole there before. Here also, if we find a hole in the lung in a place where the shoichet would have been messing around with the lung, so we can say that it's from the shoichet, it is not treif. Morna Pligabar of Yosef Dosai Virabonon. So if there was a worm in the lung, and it wormed its way, it ate its way out of the lung, leaving a hole. So Pligabar of Yosef Bar Dosai Virabonon, Yosef Bar Dosai and the Rabbanon argue about this. Chadam or Kodim Shchita Parish. One of them says we have to assume that it ate its way out of the lung before the shchita, and therefore there was a hole in the shchita and it's treif. There was a hole in the lung and it's treif. Shchita parish, and the other one says that we assume that it ate its way out of the lung post shchita, which means at the time of the shchita there was no hole in the lung. Shchita parish, and we assume that it ate its way out of the lung post shchita, and at the time of the shchita there was no hole, and the animal is kosher. I'm going to chop a shluck of tea, and we'll go weiter. Okay. Now moving on, finally, in the Mishnah, we're not yet totally out of lungs, but we will be soon. But we're moving on to the shita of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon had said that if there is that the presence of a hole in the lungs in and of itself alone is insufficient. The hole would have to be through the bronchi, through the main bronchi. Amar Rabba bar Tachlifa, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Ad shetinok the simpon gadol. It needs to pierce through the big simpon. Each of the two, right, the right side and the left side of the lungs, respectively, each have a main bronchi. It has to be punctured into one of those bronchi, those main bronchi, according to Reb Shimon. Yosef Rav Acha bar Abba Kame de Rav Huna. Rav Acha bar Abba was before Rav Huna v'Yosef v'Kamer, and he says, Amar Rab Malach, says Rab Malach, Amar Yoshua ben Levi, in the name of Yoshua ben Levi, Alocha Reb Shimon, that the Alocha follows Reb Shimon, that the hole needs to be into the bronchi of the lungs. Amar le Malach Arva Ka'amar. Rav Huna says, wait, you're talking about Malach the Arabian? Maybe he was from Chaybar. Ein Alocha Reb Shimon Ka'amar. Malach the Arabian said that the halacha is not like Reb Shimon. Kisalik Reb Zera, when Reb Zera made aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechel Reb Bivi, he found Reb Bivi, to Yosef V'Kamar, that Reb Bivi was saying, Amar Reb Malach and Reb Shimon Levi, halacha Reb Shimon. That Reb Malach says the name of Reb Shimon Levi, that the halacha accords with the opinion of Reb Shimon. Amar Le, to which Reb Zera says, Chaye Demar de honor Reb Chia Reb Chia bar Abba Reb Asi, that Reb Zera says, I, Reb Chia bar Abba, and Reb Asi, Ikla'ina na'ase de Reb Malach. We visited Reb Malach in Arabia. Ve'amrile, and I said to Reb Malach, I Omar Mar halacha Reb Shimon, did you really say that the halacha accords with the view of Reb Shimon? Ve'amarlan, and he told us, Ein halacha Reb Shimon, that the halacha is not like Reb Shimon. Rather, it's like the Chacham, that any hole in the lung is a treifa. So, V'amarlan, Ein halacha Reb Shimon Amri. I said it's not like Reb Shimon. Ve'atma biyadach, and Reb Bivi says to Reb Zera, and what do you say? Amar Le, so Reb Zera says to Reb Bivi, Hachi Amar Yitzchak, Bar Ami Reb Shua ben Levi, halacha Reb Shimon. That Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ami says the name of Rabbi Shimon Levi, that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, but concludes the Gemara, the Ein halacha Rabbi Shimon, that the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon, and therefore any hole in the lung would be a treifa. Rashi says something very interesting. All these halacha, the Gemara is saying, and this is the halacha, and that's the halacha. Says Rashi, uvi like 5 lines to the bottom of Rashi, uvi yeshiva achroina nifsiku halachos halalu, that in the final sitting of the Amoraim at the end of the Gemara, I guess, Nifsuko halachos halalu apsuko stam beGemara. I guess it sounds like probably at the end of the Gemara, around the time of the kind of editing of the Gemara, the rabbis kind of sat around and they added this kind of conclusion here that this is the halacha. Very, very interesting. And now, for the first time in a few days, we get up to a new section of the Mishnah, Nikva Akeva. If the keivah is punctured, what's the keivah? Let's have a sneaky peek. So here is a photo of the digestive system of a sheep. And what we see here is the head of the sheep, and that the food goes down the esophagus. I feel like we've seen this before. And from the esophagus, it goes to that big stomach, right? All the way on the right, the furthest rightmost label there says keres, pointing to that really big stomach there. Of course, kosher animals have 4 stomachs. The first one is the really big one. And that's the keres. From the keres, right, it digests a bit. And from there, it goes at the bottommost label, the bottom right label says the beis hakosis. It goes in, the food then goes to the beis hakosis. From the beis hakosis, it goes back up to the mouth to chew its cud. But anyways, that's the beis hakosis. And then once it finishes chewing its cud again, it goes back to the digestive system. And then, so there's the keres, the beis hakosis. And then next to the beis hakosis, up and left, you'll see that there's a label there that says hemsis, right? So beis hakosis, if you look at the label for the beis hakosis at the bottom right, if you go from the beis hakosis up and to the left, you'll see that there's a label that says hemsis, and that's pointing to the third stomach. And then, if you go to the next label on the bottom in the middle, it says keivah, and that is pointing to the keivah, that is pointing to the fourth stomach, and that is the stomach that we are talking about, the keivah. If there's a puncture in the keivah in that fourth stomach. So again, the animal eats, the food goes down the esophagus, from the esophagus into the keres, which is the first really big stomach, from the keres into the beis hakosis, then there's chewing its cud, but whatever, the next stomach after the beis hakosis it's going to get to is the hemsis, and the final stomach is the keivah. Fine. Now, let's talk for a second about chaylev. Let's talk for a minute about chaylev. So, of course, as we know, chaylev are forbidden fats. We talk all about, right, by korban chatas, the classic example is chaylev. Now, what exactly is chaylev? So, let's take a look at some psukim in Parshas Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra. So, Sefer Vayikra, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Gimel, it's talking about a korban shlomim, and it says there, Pasuk Gimel, Deikriv mizevach hashlomim, and it will be offered from the zevach hashlomim, Isha Lashem on the mizbeach, es hachaylev amechase es hakereb. The psukim list four types of chaylevs. The first one is chaylev amechase es hakereb. The next one is Veskol HaChelev Asher Al HaKerev. And then the psukim continue, Veshtei HaKlayos VesHaChelev Asher Alein. And you also burn the two kidneys together with their chelev. That's the third kind of chelev. Asher Al HaKsalim, and also the chelev on the ksalim. Fine. So we just listed there four types of chelev. Chelev amechase es hakerev, chelev asher al hakerev, that's two. Shtei haklev v'es hachelev hashelim, the chelev of the kidneys and the chelev of the ksalim. We're not going to talk about the chelev of the kidneys right now. I think we're going to talk about that in about a month and a half from now, I think, on Daf Tzadi Gimel. We are right now just going to talk about the chelevs related to the stomach. So the pasuk had mentioned. Where am I? I am the chelev amechases hakerev is a chelev asher al hakerev. What's the difference between chelev amechases hakerev and a chelev asher al hakerev? So basically, when you slice open the belly of like a goat, you'll see that there's basically a big sack there. There's like a big sack there, and the stomach and all that stuff, the keres, specifically that big stomach, that big first stomach, is in this like sack, a sack of chelev, and this is what it looks like. So if you see, so the topmost label here says chelev aprisa amechase es hakerev. That's the chelev mechase es hakerev, and then the label under that says keres. There's like literally like a bag of chelev, and in that bag is the big stomach. Like if you slice open the stomach, you'll literally pull the keres out of like the sack that it's in, the chelev sack that it's in. So that is the chelev mechase es hakerev, that big sack. And let's actually talk for it. This is actually important right now. So right now, let's actually talk about what's the difference between chelev and shuman, because there is a difference. Meaning it's all chelev. Chelev is just fats. I think, where did I read? I read somewhere that, shuman is really just, it's really all just chelev. Just the chacham say shuman versus chelev, so we have a way to talk about different types of fats. That's fine. But there is something inherently different about the fats that we call chelev versus the fats that we call shuman. Imagine you're eating a ribeye steak. And on that ribeye steak, there's like a fat. There's like fat. What's it called? There's like a fat. there's like a fat, I don't know, I don't remember. There's like a fat flap or something. But anyways, but you're eating a ribeye steak, and there's like fat as part of the steak. It's like part of the meat. It's like connected to the meat. It's not like this sack that we're seeing. This sack is not connected to the meat. The fat that is like connected and like intertwined with the meat, I think it's called a cap, like a fat cap or something like that. Anyways, so fat that's like part of the meat, that's shuman. Chaylev is like we're seeing here, this like sack that the keres is in. The characteristic of chaylev is that it's fat that's surrounded by membranes. It's got membranes on the it's got membranes around it, and that kind of separates it from the rest of the meat. It's not intertwined with the meat. It like the membrane kind of keeps it separate from the meat itself. So there's just like inherent difference between like the type of fats that would be chaylev fats and the type of fats that would be shuman fats. Now, so we talked about the chaylev of mechasa es hakerev. Now, what's the chaylev asher al hakerev? Right, the second type of chaylev. So that is the chaylev that's on the beis hakosis and on the hemsis. So you can see the third label down says hemsis on it, and the fourth label all the way at the bottom says beis hakosis. So the chaylev asher al hakerev is the chaylev that's on the hemsis and the beis hakosis. Okay, fine. I think that is enough for now. What did we do so far? We talked about the digestive system and the different stomachs, and then we also had an initial look at some of the chaylev and some of the differences between chaylev versus shuman. I think that we can now have a look at this Gemara. Okay, maybe I'll have a shluck of tea and then we'll go weiter. Okay, Babble. Now, says the Gemara. Amr Reb Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amr Reb Oshaya, Chaylev shal gabe keivah. Okay, so right now we did not talk about the chaylev on the keivah, and that was deliberate, because the chaylev on the keivah is not explicitly mentioned in the psukim. The psukim that we just read specifically, we're talking about the chaylev of the keres and the chaylev of the beis hakosis and the hemsis, but they aren't talking about specifically the chaylev of the keivah, which is the fourth stomach. Now, Amr Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amr Oshaya, chaylev shagabi keivah, with regard to the chaylev that's on the stomach, on the keivah, on the fourth stomach, Kohanim naagu bo heter. The Kohanim, why specifically the Kohanim? Because one of the matnos kehuna we are going to learn about, there's a parak later on in Masechta Chullin called Azor ve'alechayim ve'akeva, which talks about the matnos kehuna, that when a person slaughters an animal, you give to the kohen the zroa, one of the front legs, ve'alechayim, and the lower jaw, including the tongue, and the keivah, this fourth stomach. So the Kohanim were keivah Kohanim. Where am I? Chaylev sha'agabi akeva Kohanim naagu bo heter. The Kohanim would eat that chaylev, because as we said, the psukim, the chaylev that would be burnt on the mizbeach was not the chaylev of the keivah. It was the chaylev of the keres, of the beis hakosis, the hemsis, but not of the keivah, and the Kohanim would eat that. Rabbi Shmuel, like Rabbi Shmuel she'amar mishum avosab, like Rabbi Shmuel who said in the name of his fathers. V'simonech, and the way to remember that, to attribute this to Rabbi Shmuel, is Yishmael Kahana, Yishmael the Kohen. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily a reference to this Rabbi Shmuel, who was the bar pluta of Rabbi Akiva. This, I think, but there was, however, Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, one of the Asar Ruge Malchus, the Kohen Gadol, who lived earlier. So I think maybe the point is that we're saying that just like there was a Yishmael who was a Kohen, so also it could be a reminder that this Rabbi Shmuel is the one, Misayeh Kohane, who helped out the Kohanim by saying that they can eat the fat of the keivah. Ma'hi. Now, when we say that Rabbi Yishmael helps out the Kohanim, Tosfos points out, Demishum pam achas lo koreu misayeh Kohanim. Rabbi Yishmael wouldn't have this reputation of helping out the Kohanim if there was just one time that he helped them out by saying that they can, that they can consume the chaylev of the keivah. There must have been other times as well. Titania, and here we see in a brisa, Kosavarchu is b'nei Yisrael, that when the pasuk says in Parshas Naso, the Rebbeinu Shalom says to the Kohanim, bless the Yidden, right, with Yivrech Hashem, etc. Rabbi Shmuel says, Rabbi Shmuel, Lamadnu brocha li Yisrael mipi Kohanim. Okay, so we learned that the Kohanim bless the Yidden. The Kohanim atzmon lo lamadnu, but who blesses the Kohanim? Right? The Kohanim are there blessing us. We really appreciate it, but who's blessing them? Kishu Omer, when the pasuk says Vani avarechim, that when the pasuk says Yivrech Hashem v'yishmeach Yoshem v'samu Shmi al bnei Yisrael Vani avarechim. So v'samu Shmi al bnei Yisrael, that the Kohanim bless the Yidden, Vani avarechim, and I bless the Kohanim. Have Omer Kohanim avarechim Yisrael, the Kohanim bless the Yidden, v'Hakadosh Baruch Hu mevarech l'Kohanim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom blesses the Kohanim. Rabbi Kiva Omer says, Rabbi Kiva lamanu brocha li Yisrael mipi Kohanim mipi gvur lo lamanu. Says Rabbi Kiva that we learn that the Kohanim bless the Yidden. How do you know that the Rebbeinu Shalom also blesses the Yidden? Kishu Omer, when the pasuk says V'ani avarechem, and I will bless them, have Omer Kohanim mevarech Yisrael v'Hakadosh Baruch Hu maskim al yodim, that the Kohanim bless the Yidden, V'ani avarechem, and the Rebbeinu Shalom confirms, he agrees with their blessing. So then according to Rabbi Kiva, surely the Kohanim must get blessed. How so? So Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, mi va'avarecha mivarechecha, that in the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha, the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Avraham Avinu, va'avarecha, that those who bless you, va'avarecha, no, I will bless, mivarechecha, those who bless you, I will bless. Tosfos says that this isn't limited to just like Kohanim blessing the Yidden and then Hashem blesses the Kohanim. But even if a non-Jew blesses a Yid, just like he blesses us, Hashem will bless the non-Jew as well, says Tosfos. So says the Gemara that, so how do we know that the Kohanim, how do they get blessed? Well, va'avarecha mivarechecha, those who bless you, I will bless. So the Kohanim bless us, so the Rebbeinu Shalom blesses the Kohanim. Umay misayeh kehane. Now, for the Gemara, 1 second. How exactly did Rabbi Yishmael Davka help out the Kohanim? Rabbi Kiva also said that the Kohanim get blessed. Rabbi Yishmael just learned it out from Vani avarechem. He says that the Rebbeinu Shalom is blessing the Kohanim. Rabbi Kiva learns it out from V'avarecham v'arechecha. What was special about Rabbi Yishmael? Both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Kiva say that the Kohanim get blessed. So why is Rabbi Yishmael the one who helps out the Kohanim? So answers the Gemara, the Mukila, the Birkas Kohanim, the Makom Birkas Bracha D'Yisrael, because Rabbi Yishmael learns that the Rebbeinu Shalom blesses the Kohanim in the same pasuk, right? V'samu Shmi al bnei Yisrael, that the Kohanim bless the Yidden, V'ani avarechem, and I bless the Kohanim. So because, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the blessing of the Kohanim is in the same pasuk as the blessing of the Yidden, so it says Rashi, this is better because it implies that the Kohanim get blessed together with everybody else as well. Givaldik. So we see from there that this was not an isolated incident when Rabbi Yishmael said that the Kohanim can eat the chaylev of the keivah. This was not the only time that he helped them out, but also in terms of his perspective on how we know that the Kohanim get blessed as well. Okay, another cup of tea, and we're going to go weiter. Okay. Now says the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel she'amar mishum avosav mai. So what exactly was this source? What was this scenario where Rabbi Shmuel said in the name of his fathers that the Kohanim can eat the fats, the chelev of the keivah? Decided that we learn in the Brisa as kol ha'chelev asher al ha'kereb, right? So we had looked at two psukim in Parshas Vayikra. The first one said es ha'chelev ha'mechasa es ha'kereb. That was the big sack that the keres is in. The ace kol ha'chelev asher al ha'kereb. It doesn't just say es ha'chelev asher al ha'kereb, but so I think it's actually Dafka learned out from the Vav maybe. So v'es kol ha'chelev asher al ha'kereb. But we're learning out more than just, right? We had said that the chelev machasas hakereb is that big sack that the keres is in, and then there was the eskol hakereb ashel hakereb is the chelev of the beis hakosis and the hemsis, and now there's riboy of the vav of the eskol, right? V'eskol hakereb. So that extra vav is coming to include what? Le'avi chelev she'al gabe adakin is to include the chelev that is on the dakin. What's the dakin? Let's take out our diagram of the digestive system one more time. So if we follow through the digestive system, so we talked about the esophagus, the keres, the beis hakosis, the hemsis, and the keivah. The next stop after that is what's called the reish me'aya. And that reish me'aya is covered in fat. So those fats would be burnt on the mizbeach, but not the fats, not the chelev of the keivah. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that is Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Kiva Omer La'avi chelev shal gabi hakeva. Rabbi Kiva says it's not just the chelev that's on the reish me'aya, but also the chelev that's on the keivah. So according to Rabbi Kiva, the chelev on the keivah was also burnt in his back, and therefore the Kohanim would be unable to eat it. So Dafka, according to the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael, the Kohanim can eat the chelev that is on the keivah, and that's why he was considered to be looking out for them. V'ramini, however, we have a contradiction in which it's actually the opposite. It's Rabbi Akiva who allows the chelev of the keivah, and it's Rabbi Shmuel who says that the chelev of the keivah was burnt in the mizbeach. V'eskol ha'chelev asher al ha'kereb. It says Rabbi Shimon can make the Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel Omer says Rabbi Shmuel, ma'chelev ha'mechasa es ha'kereb. Just like the chelev mechasa es ha'kereb, that big sack of chelev that the keres is in, karum v'niklaf, is surrounded by a membrane, like we discussed earlier. That chelev is surrounded by a membrane, as membrane on outside of the fat. There's this membrane, v'niklaf, and that membrane can be peeled away. Afkol karum v'niklaf. So all chelev that can be that has a membrane and can be peeled away, a membrane that can be peeled away would be burnt on the mizbech, and therefore, so we're saying this is Rabbi Shmuel, and this would include not just the chelev of the reish me'aya, but also the chelev of the keivah, because the chelev of the keivah also has a membrane that could be peeled away. So we see that Rabbi Shmuel here is including the chelev of the keivah. Rabbi Akiva gets more specific. Ma'chelev mechasa es hakereb. When it comes to that big sack of chelev that the keres is in, tosov karum v'niklaf. In addition to that chelev sack having an outer membrane that could be peeled away, it also is draped. Rashi says that it's milashon a simla, like a gown. Tosve. So tosef means that it's like draped like a gown. That sack is not connected to any meat. It's easy to just pull the stomach out of it. And especially when the animal is standing up, it's kind of draped over. Although that would be that would be lower down on the belly. But anyways, it's kind of draped over the keres and stuff like that. It's not like attached to the stomach, as opposed to the keivah. The chaylev of the keivah is really attached to the keivah. It's not draped over it. So I've called tosav karim v'niklav. So the chaylev that's burnt on the mizbeach is chaylev that is as a membrane that's peeled away, but is also draped to the exclusion of the keivah, where its chaylev is actually attached to it. Shalach Ravin Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. So Ravin said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Kach I Atzoya Shamishna, and that is the correct way. This latter version is correct. That it's Rabbi Yishmael who says that the keivah is burnt, the chaylev of the keivah is burnt on the mizbeach, and Rabbi Akiva says it is not. The ipuch kamaisa, and we're going to have to therefore switch around the original version. The original version was incorrect. The original version where we said that it's Rabbi Yishmael who permits the chaylev of the keivah. No, we got to flip it around. It's really Rabbi Akiva who permits it. And Rabbi Yishmael says that it's burnt in the mizbeach. My chaz is the apchos kamaisa ipuch basraisa. But one second, why are you saying that the first version was wrong? Maybe the second version was wrong. Shiny Acha, the second version is different. If the second version is correct, I'll tell you why. Katoni ma davka, because the second version really went into the details and the nuance. That Rabbi Yishmael was saying it's because of karum v'niklav. Rabbi Akiva was saying that it's tosav karum v'niklav, because they really got into the details, not just. Rabbi Akiva says that it's talking about the keivah, and Rabbi Yishmael says it's talking about the dakin. No, they really got into more detail about the why, about the peeling away and the membranes. Therefore, we could trust that brisa more, because whoever was teaching that brisa was paying attention to more of the details, and therefore that would also include the details of who said what. Okay, fine. So if that's the case, that it's really Rabbi Akiva who permitted the fats of the keivah to the Kohanim. So Yachik Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva. So when we said earlier at the beginning of the Gemara that the Kohanim eat the chaylev of the keivah like Rabbi Shmuel, really they ate it like Rabbi Akiva. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Shom Mishum Avosa V'Leilo Svirle. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak points out, well, it didn't say that Rabbi Shmuel permitted them to eat it. He said that he permitted them in the name of his fathers. His fathers permitted them to eat the fat of the keivah. He didn't agree with his fathers. However, he would say that the fats of the keivah would be burnt in the mizbeach, and the Kohanim would be unable to eat them. Omar Rav says, Rab, chaylev tahor sosim tameino sosim. Amazing. So, like we mentioned earlier, that there's actually a qualitative difference between what we call chaylev and what we call shuman. Shuman is more part of the meat, whereas chaylev it's got this membrane surrounding it, and it doesn't really connect to the meat. So therefore, says Rav, in terms of if there would be a hole, let's say the stomach has a hole in it, the keres, let's say, has a hole in it, and it's being covered by the chaylev sac that the stomach is in. So it says Rav, that chaylev is not going to be an effective cover on that and like plug on that hole, because it has its own the chaylev has its own separate membrane. It's not really going to plug in the hole well. But if you have a hole in a place where it's surrounded by shuman, that shuman, or if you just think about eating your steak and there's that like fatty fat, you can imagine that fat kind of getting into whatever hole would be in that organ, and would really plug it up. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rab, chaylev tahor sosem. When we talk about shuman, right, permissible fats, so that really gets into the meat, and if there would be a hole in some kind of organ, it would plug up that hole. Tameh, when we talk about forbidden fats, eno sosem, it won't plug up a hole, because those are qualitatively different fats. They have a membrane around them, and they don't really plug things up good. Rav Sheshes Omer, echod zeh ve'echod zeh sosem, whereas Rav Sheshes disagrees and he says even the chaylev, the non-kosher chaylev, can plug a hole, and if the keres gets a hole in it, the chaylev that is the chaylev sack, if it's covering the hole, would be an effective plug. Okay. But Reb Zera asks, chaylev chaya mai. What about the chaylev of a deer? Because chaylev of a deer is mutter. You're allowed to eat the chaylev of a deer. The chaylev of a cow, a sheep, a goat, you're not allowed to eat. But the chaylev of a deer, of a chaya, you're allowed to eat. So, davka omar chaylev tahor sosem bainami tahoru. So when we said that the chaylev of permissible fats, of shuman, will plug up a hole, and we called it chaylev tahor, so basically any permitted chaylev will plug up a hole. Well, the chaylev of the sack that the keres is in, for a cow, a sheep, or a goat, it's not kosher, but for a deer, it is kosher. And if the defining criteria is that it has to be kosher fat for it to be considered able to plug up a hole, well, this is kosher fat. Or do we say, no, look, it's a practical consideration that the shuman, the permissible fats in like a sheep, goat, cow, those are kind of fattier and connect with the meat better and will actually plug up the hole. And even though this chaylev sack of the deer is kosher, but it's not going to plug up that hole, practically speaking. Amar Abai says, Abai, my tibarle, what's the question? Nihid deshari bachila, granted that the chaylev of a deer is permitted to be eaten, at the end of the day, in terms of its qualities, its characteristics, aduri lo mahadek, it's not going to be able to seal up that hole because it's chaylev and it's got its own membranes that's going to keep it separate. How nekev de sasma chaylev tame, thus the comment of Rava. There was a scenario came before Rava. Somebody brought an animal that was just slaughtered, and there was a hole, let's say in the keres, and he wanted to know, can the chaylev that's surrounding the keres be can we consider like it's plugging the hole, and that the animal is kosher? Amar Rava says, Rava, l'may nechos, yeah, no problem. What are we concerned about at the end of the day? Chada da Amar Rav Sheshes chaylev tamei nami sosim. Firstly, Rav Sheshes argues with Rav, and Rav Sheshes says that even chaylev can plug the hole. Ve'od, and more so, haTorah chasam v'vonim shel Yisrael. Of course, the Torah is sensitive when it comes to the money of the Yidden, and therefore if a person is coming with an animal, let's say a cow is a big investment, can feed his family for many, many months. And there's this hole, and it could be considered covered by the chaylev. We are going to be considerate of this person's expense and say that the cow is kosher, based on the fact that Rav Sheshes says that the chaylev can in fact plug up the hole, and if we say that it's treif, it will be a significant hefsid. So Rava paskin that the animal is kosher. Amalei Rav Papa l'Rav. Rav Papa says to Rava, mapitom. 1 second. First of all, Rav. Question number 1 is that Rav says that this chaylev cannot plug up the hole, and B, v'isur d'oraisa. We're talking about an isur d'oraisa over here. Treif is an isur d'oraisa. Bat omrat haTorah chasan v'vonim shel Yisrael, and you're coming and saying that the Torah is sensitive towards the money of the Yidden, therefore he can eat this animal. Treif is an isur d'oraisa. Uvasar basada treif lo sochelu. It's an isur d'oraisa. So says our Papa to Rava, I don't understand how you can be lenient on this matter and say haTorah chasam v'vonim shel Yisrael. So this is the rice here. Manyomin kanduka, manyomin the potter, igle lay bistika deduvshe. he had a jug of honey, and unfortunately that jug of honey was left open, was left exposed, and he's concerned, what do we have to do about the fact that maybe a snake may have gotten in there and poisoned it? So also the comment, the Rava came before Rava, and he says, what do I do about this jug with honey in it? Do I have to throw it out? Rava says, no, you don't have to throw it out. The my nechos, what are we concerned about? Chada, number one, the Tnan. We learn in a Mishnah in Masechta Trumis. Shlosha mashkim asur mishum gila. There's only 3 liquids that are also because of giloy if they're left open, like we learned about Masechta Avodah Zarah, the concern that a snake might get in it and poison it with venom. Hayayin v'amayim v'acholav, and those 3 liquids are wine, water, and milk. V'shar kol hamashkim mutarim, but all the other liquids are permissible, and therefore honey, you don't have to be concerned. Ve'od, and more so, haTorah chasa amamonim sheYisrael, the Torah is sensitive towards the money of the Yidden, and we're not going to make you, we don't want to make you throw out all this honey. But it says of Nachman Ba'Yitzchak to Rava, first of all, Reb Shimon says that you do have to be concerned about Mayim Megulin, you do have to be concerned about snakes when it comes to honey. And v'sakonas nefashos. And there's a reason why we don't eat, why we don't consume this water. Because at that time, it was considered sakonas nefashos. That a snake could have gotten in it. There were snakes around in those areas, and their venom could have gotten into the liquid. So therefore, Rav is saying, don't worry about the honey. This halach only applies to water, to wine, and to milk. And anyways, we want to have Rachmanas on your money. Says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. First of all, Reb Shimon says that you do have to be concerned about the snakes, and we're talking about life and death over here. How can you be lenient? Now this, I believe, does not apply anymore. We'd seen the sheet of Rabbeinu Tam and Masechta Avodah Zarah, but also there was a note in the article that says that this is not a non-issue anymore. So the fact that they were willing to say that, I guess it really is. It's not something that we have to be concerned about nowadays. But anyways, about Amar Tator Chasam, we're talking about Sakanis and Fashis here. I don't understand, Rava, you can just be lenient when you have the sheet of Reb Shimon who says that you do have to be concerned about the snakes when it comes to honey. Reb Shimon Mai, what's the sheet of Reb Shimon? Tisani, we learn in the Brisa, Chamisha ein boim mishum gilui. There are 5 liquids that you don't have to be concerned about gilui, about snakes. Tzir, fish brine, v'chometz, vinegar, shemen, oil, v'dvash, and honey. Umurius, and some kind of fish gut dip. Apparently the snakes didn't like that very much. Reb Shimon almost says, Reb Shimon, af ein yesh ben mishum gilui, that you do actually have to be concerned about leaving them unattended and that snakes might get into them. And on that list was honey. So we see that Reb Shimon is concerned about the snakes when it comes to honey. From Reb Shimon says, Reb Shimon, ani ra'isi nochash sheshasot tzir b'tzidan. And I, Taka, saw a snake that got into the fish brine in Sidon. Amilo shate ava. They said no, that snake was an anomaly. Fein mevin rayim in ashotim. You can't bring proofs from anomalies, so don't come and say, well, I saw a snake consume fish brine, and therefore that whole list of fish brine and oil and honey, etc. We should be concerned about the snakes for all those. That snake was an exception. Omar lei. So now if Nachman Bar Yitzchak says to, or was this Rava? Rava says to Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Odi limias bitzir, but says Rava to Nachman Bar Yitzchak, well, you do have to at least admit to me that when it comes to the fish brine, that there would be no concern about the snakes. The Rapapa of Ravuda by the Yeshua v'Rabbanon ki havalu giluya, that Rav Papa and Ravuda by the Yeshua and the other rabbis, if they had wine or water that was left unattended, they were concerned about the snakes. Shadu le bitzir, they would pour it into fish brine to kill any of that venom. So clearly, fish brine is not something that you have to be concerned about about snake venom in it. And therefore Rava wanted to make the point that, and just like there's no concern about snakes by fish brine, there also wouldn't be concern about snakes by honey. Amar le, to which Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak responds to him, O dilimia, that you, Rava, should respond to me, but Dvash, when it comes to honey, to Reb Shimon ben Elazar kai kavase, that when it comes to honey, Reb Shimon ben Elazar concurs with the shita of Reb Shimon. Titani v'chena Reb Shimon ben Elazar also b'Dvash, that Reb Shimon ben Elazar would also say that honey was also that we have to be concerned about the snakes. So argues of Nachman bar Yitzchak, no, we do have to be concerned about honey and snakes, and it's sakanas nefashos over here, and we have to rule stringently, and that honey needs to be thrown away. Friends, that was Daf Mem Test, Daf 49 of Masechta Chulin, and Daf 49 we wrapped up the section of the Mishnah that discussed the lungs. We were talking about different things that get stuck in the lungs and trying to figure out how did they get in there. Is it a treifa? Isn't it a treifa? We're talking about needles and eyes of needles. And okay. And then we moved on to the next section. Technically the next section was Reb Shimon, who says that the needle would have to puncture into the bronchioles. Ultimately, there's a whole question, is the halacha like him? Isn't the halacha like him? Then we said the halacha is not like him. And bronchi. And then we moved on to the section that talks about a punctured keivah, which is the fourth of the stomachs, and we started talking about chelev, which is a very interesting discussion. We saw machlokes between Reb Shimon and Reb Akiva. Reb Shimon says that the chelev of the keivah, it was part of it went on the mizbeach, and therefore the assumption of the Gemara seems to be that because it went on the mizbeach, therefore it was not allowed to be eaten by the Kohanim. That was the shita of Rabbi Shmuel. Interestingly, the Ramban on the Torah says that all chelev, if it matches the characteristics of chelev, of having that membrane, so then all chelev, whether it was put on the mizbeach or not, would not be allowed to be eaten. But anyways, we seem to be assuming that specifically chelev that was burnt on the mizbeach was not able to be consumed. But Rabbi Akiva said that the chelev of the keivah was not burnt in the mizbeach, therefore the Kohanim were allowed to eat it. And we saw an interesting machlokes between Rav and Rav Sheshes about when there is a hole, if chelev would be able to cover the hole or only shuman. Rav says only shuman. Rav Sheshes says even chelev can cover it. And we also saw an interesting discussion about Birkas Kohanim, that the Kohanim bless the Yidden. Who blesses the Kohanim? Well, the Rabban Shalom blesses the Kohanim, and Rabbi Yishmael learned that out from V'samri Shmiel b'nei Yisrael. That's the Kohanim blessing the Yidden. V'ani avarachem, and I will bless the Kohanim. Rabbi Kiva says it's learned out from V'avarecha mivaracheka, that I will bless those who bless you. The Kohanim bless us. The Rabban Shalom blesses the Kohanim. Friends, that was Daf Mem Tes, Daf 49 of Masechta Chulin. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.